At that time, Jesus went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden, and he entered it with his disciples. Judas, the betrayer, also knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came there with a detachment of soldiers and some guards sent by the chief priests and the Pharisees, carrying lanterns, torches, and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing everything that was going to happen to him, stepped forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, the betrayer, was standing there with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. So he asked them again, "Whom are you looking for?" They replied, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken might be fulfilled, "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the soldiers, their commander, and the Jewish guards arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be better for one man to die for the people. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was following Jesus along with another disciple. That disciple was known to the high priest, and he entered the courtyard of the high priest with Jesus. Peter, however, remained outside at the door. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the servant girl who kept the door, and brought Peter inside. The servant girl said to Peter, "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" He replied, "I am not." The servants and guards had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it warming themselves. Peter was also standing with them and warming himself. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said." When he said this, one of the guards standing there struck Jesus in the face and said, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus replied, "If I said something wrong, testify to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. They said to him, "You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" Peter denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Then they brought Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters, so that they would not be defiled and could eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and asked, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves, and judge him according to your law." But the Jews replied, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he would die. Pilate then went back inside the headquarters, called Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But my kingdom is not from here." Pilate said, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After saying this, he went out again to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I release one prisoner to you at Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Not this man!" "But Barabbas!" Now Barabbas was a rebel. Then Pilate had Jesus taken and flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and placed it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him. They came up to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no guilt in him." Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the guards saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." They answered, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he became even more afraid. From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews shouted, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, in Hebrew Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover, about noon. Pilate said to the Jews, "Here is your king." But they shouted, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. They took Jesus, and carrying his own cross, he went out to the place called the Skull, which in Hebrew is Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate also had an inscription written and placed on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. It was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather, this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took the tunic, but the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, "Let's not tear it. Let's cast lots to see who will get it." This happened to fulfill the scripture that says, "They divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." And that is what the soldiers did. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour the disciple took her into his home. After this, knowing that everything had now been completed, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I thirst." A jar of sour wine was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and lifted it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It was the day of preparation, and the Jews did not want the bodies to remain on the cross during the Sabbath, because that Sabbath was a high day. So they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water flowed out. The one who saw it has testified, and his testimony is true. He knows that he is telling the truth, so that you also may believe. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And again another scripture says, "They will look on the one they have pierced." After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jews, asked Pilate for permission to take the body of Jesus. Pilate granted it. So he came and took the body. Nicodemus also came, the same man who had earlier visited Jesus at night. He brought about 75 pounds of a mixture of myrrh and aloes. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it in linen cloths with the spices, according to the Jewish burial custom. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.